So it feels like there's been a lot of DCU news lately after quite a while, actually, where there was really not a whole lot to talk about with the DCU. Then we started to get our first look at Superman, looking at the set photos, and, it wasn't news, but we got our first trailer for Creature Commando, so we were getting some updates on the DCU. But lately, it feels like they've been coming a lot more often, and most importantly, actually, they've been coming in the form of casting news. So we have another bit of casting news to discuss, and we'll talk about the actor, we'll talk about the role that he's playing in the film that he's going to appear in, but more so than that, because this isn't just a channel that only does breaking news and just reports the news. I mean, I want to talk about the fact that this is breaking news, and hopefully by the time you hear this is still recent news, but more so than that, I also want to talk about a couple implications that this has for the DCU. So first of all, just talking about the news itself, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow is going to be the second film in the DCU. It's going to be starring Millie Alcock, who is from House of the Dragon. She's going to be playing Supergirl, which is exciting. But we haven't really heard much else from that. We've heard about the directors and the writers, I believe, but we haven't really heard much else other than Millie Alcock is going to be playing Supergirl. So this is a big piece of news. We have the villain confirmed in Supergirl. It's going to be KREM of the Yellow Hills, and he's going to be played by Matthias. I'm going to mispronounce this name. I say this almost every episode. Schoenaerts. Schoenaerts? I am so sorry. I completely butchered that name. But I'm just going to call him Matthias. We have a casting for Supergirl. Matthias is playing KREM of the Yellow Hills. Now, if you are anything like me, A, you are not familiar at all with Matthias, and B, you are not familiar at all with KREM of the Yellow Hills, because I am pretty much unfamiliar with both. So just, if this were just a news reporting segment, that's it. That's the news. We have a casting, we have a villain, let's move on. But I think this is interesting in that there are two implications, right? There are two major implications, not major implications, but just interesting bits of news here that I wanted to discuss in terms of what this means for the DCU. So number one, this means, I think, that the DCU is on a roll. And by on a roll, I mean it's gaining momentum, because all of a sudden, like I alluded to at the beginning of this segment, the DCU has been gaining momentum, just you can tell because of the amount of news that's coming out about it, right? So you have your Hal Jordan castings, and then all of a sudden you have details about probably the first big HBO Max show, Lanterns, right? That's coming out from the DCU. And I know Creature Commandos is coming out first, but I mean the first live action, really big DCU show that's coming out. So what this tells me is that we are now entering the phase, because I think the DCU will hopefully enter a point where everything is flowing at once. You have different projects in pre-production, some in post-production, some filming, just like the MCU, right? Agatha All Along is out, but then you have films in pre-production, and like Fantastic Four First Steps was a couple months ago. Now it's filming. Other films like Avengers Doomsday is in pre-production. So you have everything flowing at once. But because the DCU is brand new, we're sort of starting from ground zero, right? So this tells me that we are now starting to build momentum. Things are getting cast. I'm sure in a couple months that more things like Lanterns and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow will be in pre-production and will be heading into filming, while Superman, I was going to say Superman Legacy, but Superman will be in post-production and will be entering the marketing campaign. And then pretty soon we'll have a better idea of other projects that are coming out. So I think this also solidifies, the release calendar. I think it's going to be Creature Commandos. It's probably going to be Superman followed by Peacemaker Season 2. And then we'll get, I think, probably Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow right around the same time as Lanterns, if not a little bit before, is my guess with that, because it seems like they're a little bit further along. And I think those are the first 5 or 6 projects from the DC, which is exciting. So that's the first takeaway, is that the DCU is gaining momentum. The second takeaway, though, that I have from this is that I think one key difference from the DCU and the MCU is going to be that the DCU is going to be a lot more faithful to their comic book inspirations. Now, I think this was something we could have already... We could tell just by the way that James Gunn is making his films and teasing them and whatnot. But I think that this is just further confirmation of that fact, that we are going to be getting, I think if we get a film that's based on a comic book title, I think that we should be well aware that while they're not going to just directly adapt anything, I don't think that that's true. I think that they will be taking specific inspirations from the comic books, because look, I mean, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow was a very well-received comic book, and on the flip side, who has heard of KREM of the Yellow Hills other than people who have actually read Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, right? I think I haven't heard of him as a villain. I did some research, and he's done some pretty terrible things in that comic book, but he's not a very well-known villain. But I think that this is a sign, again, that, the DCU is going to be taking a lot more heavy, direct inspiration from the comic book. So I think that that'll be interesting, because obviously you had Age of Ultron, nothing like Age of Ultron. Civil War, nothing like Civil War. Infinity War, nothing like Infinity War, except in the skeleton, right? What the general premise of those projects were. And I think that is, that's going to be interesting, right? And other MCU films like Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home and No Way Home, there's no basis for those in the comic books other than the characters and the general abilities and plot lines, general things that happen in those films. So I think this will be something to watch for in the DCU. If you're a comic book fan, I think that's exciting, and we'll have to see where we go from here. But what do you guys think of the casting, and what do you guys think of my thoughts on the implications of this for the DCU? Let me know in the comments down below.